we're in this moment of, I think, tremendous opportunity, and now we need to back it up with real political will, with the level of financial investment at national scales, but also locally in communities. So our work on the IPCC report has shown that in the next 20 years, the nature of the climate system means that increasing risks are basically built in. So coastal cities like New York are really going to be more and more at risk because we expect increasing frequency and intensity of coastal storms. You know that one of the things that we've done in the Urban Systems Lab is looked at this a little bit more in New York, and we've seen that in environmental justice communities here, 800,000 people are already living below the 100-year floodplain.
Yeah, and I think an important point to build off of that is that communities are not heterogeneous. So we need to understand what community means. Specifically in New York City, there's a very differential exposure to something like flooding when we're talking about higher income, middle income people living in condos who maybe are employed in knowledge economy jobs, and when a flood hits can quickly move out, keep gaining income, versus a lower income renter who may still be able to move out and go live with relatives and friends, but will have to probably spend more of their financial and economic basis on repairing, recovering, because they won't have access to jobs anymore, and are more generally prone to spend savings that are needed to take care of other more immediate concerns.
And this is an issue not just in New York City, right?
Right.
I mean, we're seeing this in coastal communities all across the US, and in fact, around the world. These similar issues of who's most at risk tends to fall very heavily on the low income and marginalized communities, on minority populations and immigrant communities, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many obstacles in the ways of real solutions. There's areas in New York City and in many parts of the world where there's a continued disinvestment in drainage and infrastructure overall, in false promises of neighborhood economic development, underserving communities in terms of physical and mental health. And all this builds a distrust from communities towards city officials and city agencies. And so it becomes really hard when a city agency then comes into a neighborhood and wants to think of planning for urban climate resilience. And there's this ongoing history of distrust and neglect. So I think that's a very big challenge.
Addressing that challenge, really overcoming this obstacle of a history of racist and other policies that have basically put poor marginalized communities in harm's way, is not an easy obstacle to overcome, right? It's a planning challenge, it's a design challenge, it's an engagement challenge, it's a governance challenge, right? And I'm glad that there's a lot of exciting movement to address all of these, and there's sort of increased awareness of this challenge, but it's clear we have a long way to go.
I'm excited about the efforts of community-based organizations led by women, such as Rise in Rockaway and the Red Hook Initiative, who are really investing resources in sharing knowledge, skills, competencies. This tries to address cross-cutting issues from, being able to advocate for yourself as an individual, but also to build social and economic strengths in neighborhoods, which I think it's crucial to be able to also address something like flood risk.
I think there's an interesting bright spot, we might call it, in participatory budgeting, where there's examples here in New York City of basically allowing communities to take over part of the city budget and to collectively decide how it's spent. Now, right now, that's a very small percentage of the actual budget, but the experiment has been largely successful, and we're seeing this in other cities across the US as well. You know, one of the things that gives me hope is seeing actions that are happening at pretty much every scale. We see communities are making their own climate resilience plans and bringing diverse stakeholders around the table to collectively decide what is a better future for themselves.
And I mean, an example of that was the Environmental Justice Working Group that was set up under Mayor de Blasio, I believe in 2019. There was a large participation of communities, individuals, community-based organizations in trying to decide, what are the key issues that define environmental injustice in New York City, and how that can be citywide, and how that can build on solutions that will be able to address these environmental justices. So I think the fact that at the city scale we're discussing this is very important. It wasn't like this 5 years ago even.
No, the climate challenge is challenging because it's complex, especially when we think about the disproportionate impacts of who's really bearing the brunt of climate impacts, right? We have legacies of disinvestment that have placed people in harm's way. We have issues of trust and agency, of even who has a role in decision making. I think that's where the solution space also has to be complex. And that to me is both where the opportunity space is for real innovation, to do things differently, to think about fundamental transformation in how we plan and how we design. That's exactly why I think some of the work that's happening here at the New School, work that we're doing with other partners and other leaders and thinkers in this space, are creating the kinds of solutions that can cut across this complexity and look at real systemic change.